Oh, yeah. You could have been if you went to the show last night. They were all down there together.
Welcome to the open interview, CEO interviews, and welcome to the public who's here, and also welcome to Mr. Starheim. Can we please have,
Barrett,
Yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Gay, Green,
Yes.
Hurley, McGuire,
yes,
Mines,
Here?
Ulrich. Agenda item number 2, notice of the time and place of this meeting was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza since March 5th, 2015, and by mailing such notice to each of the district's directors on that same date. A copy of the proposed agenda for this meeting has been maintained on a current basis and is readily available for public inspection in the office of the district's corporate secretary. Additionally, a copy of the open meetings law is available for inspection in the public meeting book located in this meeting room.
thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Mr. Gregory Starheim. Mr. Starheim is the CEO and president of Kenergy Corporation. Welcome to the Big O.
Thank you very much.
Except the new thing is that we don't coast. That's our new saying, we don't coast. So we're very happy that you're here and are able to participate with us. Mr. Starheim is president and CEO of an electric distribution utility in northwestern Kentucky that serves 56,000 customers and has a peak of 1,200 megawatts. Previously, he managed a smaller electric distribution utility and early has had a very lengthy career with General Electric, where he had experience with both fossil and nuclear generation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman of our Governance Committee, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Greg, as we discussed earlier, the first part of our interview will be a structured question session. Each director will take turns asking questions. Upon the conclusion of that section of the interview process, we'll have the opportunity to go into private session if any of the directors have any more personal or sensitive type questions at that point. So, that being said, I'll ask the first question, and that is, each member of the board has reviewed your resume, so we have some familiarity with your experience. With that in mind, would you spend about 5 minutes providing an overview of the most pertinent aspects of your experience and abilities as it relates to being OPPD's president and CEO?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's very my pleasure to be considered for this position. By way of an overview of my background, as you can see in my resume, I am an engineer by degree with an MBA. And did spend just under 20 years with General Electric Company, and the relevant aspects of that was virtually all of that was in the area of power generation and related technologies. So during that 20-year tenure at GE, I became intimately familiar from various functional roles that I had, including leadership roles at GE, with certainly the nuclear industry and the nuclear power plants, fossil and natural gas type of technologies. And when I say fossil, I'm talking about traditional pulverized coal type of technologies as well as advanced clean coal technologies. A lot of that time at GE was spent in gas turbine combined cycle technology, both in the engineering, technology development, and project development and operation and maintenance of power plants. And also during that time, I spent quite a bit of time on other aspects of power generation technology as well, including distributed generation technologies, as well as renewable technologies as well. So that was the first, what I'd consider to be, up to now, my 30-year career. About 2/3 of my career have been working for GE in all of those technology segments relevant to OPPD's business. And during that time, there was progressive leadership roles that I held in both engineering, technology, marketing, product development, and project management. The last 10 to 12 years of my career has been in public power. In that time, I've been the CEO of electric utilities, both on the distribution side of the business as well as on the generation side of the business. After leaving GE, I spent 8 years with a small cooperative in upstate New York called the Delaware County Electric Cooperative, where it was a small distribution cooperative, but we had intentions, and we did expand into the generation side. And in that time, we attempted to develop a 60 megawatt hydroelectric plant with an application to FERC, and that gave me familiarity with the FERC licensing process for hydros. We also had a subsidiary to develop wind generation, and in fact, we did develop 3 wind projects, one of which, and I should add, there was never an intention of owning these facilities long-term, but our philosophy as a public power entity is that if there is going to be wind in our area, we need to be part of it, and we need to control it and understand how our consumers are going to benefit from it, as opposed to third-party private companies coming in and developing wind in our area for the benefit of their companies and not having local consumer benefit associated with it. So there was an aspect of that that ended up with the development of a 60 megawatt wind project that we did divest of, and that was our strategy right along, to divest of these projects after what we considered to be phase 1 development, where we had a solid project defined and we could divest to a company to take it to the rest of the way. But with that divestiture, not just came a financial windfall for the utility, but also a long-term power sale agreement that we were going to enjoy for many years. So that was the strategy. During that time, too, there was also a local landfill, and we worked with the county very closely on being the principal developer, and in that case, the owner and operator of a small landfill gas project that was to benefit not just the local consumers of the utility, but also county taxpayers as well. 3 years ago, I was given the opportunity to take my current role, which is, as the Chairwoman mentioned, President and Chief Executive Officer of Kenergy Corporation. This is a very substantial electric cooperative located in western Kentucky. We are one of the 3 member owners of a wholesale generation cooperative, generation and transmission cooperative by the name of Big Rivers Electric Corporation. Big Rivers operates a fleet of about 1,500 megawatts of generation, and we are the recipients of under contract from Big Rivers as the owner and member and wholesale taker of Big Rivers' electricity that they produce for us. During this time at Kenergy, though, Kenergy and Western Kentucky, as some of you may know, is an area which has had some of the lowest electric rates historically in the country. And that has been an area that has been very successful in economic development, in particular industrial development. And so we're very fortunate to have a very large industrial base there. Kenergy is what we can call a full requirements customer of Big Rivers, with the exception of 2 very large industrial loads. And in fact, last year, Kenergy began serving these 2 industrial loads off the Mid-Continent ISO directly. So we are sourcing a good amount of our power supply from one of the big RTOs in this country that some of you may be familiar with, analogous to SPP for OPPD. But the rest of our power supply is on a wholesale basis coming from a Big Rivers, which we are a member and owner of. So those are kind of a brief overview of my background and how it's relevant to OPPD.
Greg, could you talk to us a little bit about how you've engaged stakeholders to advance the mission of the companies that you've worked for?
Sure. And I'd say it's very different from transitioning from a General Electric world to a public power world, of course. So I'm going to focus my comments, if you don't mind, on the last 12 years working in the public power arena. We are public servants, I believe, working in this industry. And as a result, we are here for one reason and one reason only, and that's to serve our consumers. Not to generate profit, not to advance an agenda, but it's to serve our consumer owners, consumer customers, consumer members, whatever you want to call them, as best we can. So in part, this is, by nature of our business, we need to be transparent and we need to listen to our members through the democratic process of public power. You all are elected to represent your customers. The board at Kenergy and in any public power entity that has a customer-elected board of directors, where it's a democratic process where you're all representing our consumers. And in fact, as an executive in this industry, the board sets the strategic direction of the business, which I should reflect what our consumers want in an electric utility. And it's, in my mind, the responsibility of a chief executive officer to carry out the wishes of the board of directors. So that's how I believe an organization establishes its strategic direction. And I think an organization can only be successful, especially in the world that we live in public power, as to be as transparent and open as possible.
If I could follow up, Madam Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Any processes or programs that you've initiated that directly interact with our stakeholders, our customers? How would you interact and involve our ratepayers in our process?
Well, I would say everything we do, practically everything we do, is going to involve our stakeholders or our owners or customers. It's imperative that we have open communications with our customers. Certainly, very open and frank communications that occur. There are customer advisory groups that we have typically established to bring in certain customers that want to engage in that process. And frankly, these are very useful forums to give feedback to an idea that we may be considering but are not launching yet. An idea that we may be struggling with, like, do you want to do this, even though it might affect your rates somewhat? And so I think the whole process of gathering stakeholder input is critical in the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis in public power.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Greg, thanks for coming, by the way. I got a question, and so you've dealt with boards of directors. How do you personally interact with the board? Or, I mean, they can be difficult, not ours, of course. But how do you build on relationships, or how do you foster those relationships? Like what you're saying, that's the way it works. But how do you personally work with a board?
Sure.
What's been your experiences?
Yeah, I think in order for an organization to be successful and in order for a CEO to be successful, it's imperative that there's a relationship that exists between a board and a chief executive officer, one of trust, one of a consultative type of relationship. And in my mind, what I value in a board is an opportunity to voice ideas and basically have a dialogue about ideas on what we might consider decisions that we might be making. As far as the relationship, to your point, organizationally, a CEO must take direction from a board, not individually. I think it's important for a CEO to have relationships and know each director. And I take pride in that. I believe I've done that in my 12 years working in public power. I need to know where directors are coming from, and I value their personal backgrounds and their opinions on certain things. I also invite, again, in the spirit of transparency, openness and frankness and honesty about what might be concerns that a director may have, some of which may be appropriate to bring out in a public session, and others, if there's a concern, about something, I'd like to know about it, not to shut down any transparency, but to understand in more detail where a director may be coming from. So I guess to answer your question directly, I think there's an important aspect of a personal relationship that a CEO has with directors, but also ultimately I need to take direction, or a CEO needs to take direction from the board in entirety. And oftentimes, of course, not all directors are in agreement with a decision, and it's important, I think, for a board to make a decision and stick to that decision and not have a board fracture on what comes out of that decision.
Thank you.
Greg, would you please describe your experience
establishing a culture with a strong organizational and personal accountability, and how do you maintain that type of culture?
Are you referring to an organization leadership type of?
And accountability. Yeah,
Okay.
related to accountability, yes.
Well, in my entire career, I've been given opportunities to lead organizations, whether they're small project organizations or departments or entire corporations. And I think some of the basic principles apply no matter what level you're talking about in a leader. If I'm leading a project, I'm accountable for the members of the folks that are on that project and the deliverable that that project is intended to deliver. Similarly, at the department level and on a corporate level, it's important that the folks that are the key members of that team, whether it's a senior staff team or a project team, that everyone understands the objectives of what we're trying to accomplish, and that we are committing as a team, not me personally or the leader of that team, but we are committing as a team that we're going to deliver those objectives. And ultimately, as the leader of that team, I would be accountable for that.
Thank you.
Good morning. Some of this may have already been answered in your earlier answers, but my question is what methodology do you use to evaluate the financial success of a business such as ours?
Well, I think obviously there's the balance there of strong financial performance and keeping rates low to the customers as best we can. The obvious objectives are we all borrow money and we have obligations to our borrowers. So whether it's debt service coverages or tier performances or whatever the loan covenants say we must perform to, that's the most obvious one. Beyond that, there may be other financial metrics that occur. Maybe it's targets on cost reductions or other things. But ultimately, this all gets down to what are the customers paying in their rates, and how do we balance that to make sure that the organization has strong financial performance, where the organization can maintain strong credit ratings and is in sound condition to maintain its loan covenants to its members, to its lenders.
Thank you.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for coming to Omaha. My question is, what leadership strengths do you bring to this position? Please provide examples of how you used these skills to improve your organization.
Sure. I think this goes a bit to personality characteristics. I think leadership is not something that you just decide you're gonna do one day. It's a matter of how do you present yourself in a way that earns trust and credibility to folks. I think as part of that is a strong dialogue of communication, honesty, transparency in how you approach problems. And so I think in my background, when I reflect back at all the challenges or opportunities I've had for leadership, they've involved having folks that are involved in a team where you need to bring them together and create a high-performing organization or a team. And I think all of that gets involved in team building. I mean, and team building is another way of building credibility amongst yourselves to make sure that you all know what you're trying to accomplish, that there's an element of trust and credibility, there's clear defined roles and responsibilities amongst the team members, and there's a clear direction on what we're trying to accomplish and under what schedule we're trying to accomplish that. So I'd say those are the basic aspects of my leadership skills. Throughout the years, I think I've been successful in doing that, and the organization and projects that we've been able to accomplish, I think, reflect that.
Can you give me two examples of challenges that you faced in Kentucky at the utility and how they were resolved, or are they ongoing, or?
Sure. Are you talking about organizationally or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah, I think, and this is really the primary issue that we're facing right now. Excuse me. As I mentioned, Kenergy is a member, customer, owner of our wholesale power supplier. And our two of our largest industrials have decided to terminate a contract that they had with Kenergy and our wholesale power supplier and request us to source that power off the MISO instead of through our wholesale power supplier. And so what that has caused is our wholesale power supplier has generating assets that no longer are fully subscribed to serve their native load. But they still have the debt service and depreciation associated with these facilities. Again, you make decisions in this business that you're going to live with for 40, 50 years. And in fact, in the past, the wholesale power supplier has decided to build these generating plants in anticipation that there was going to be that industrial load to support. So what's happened here, to get back to your question, is that loss of revenue from our wholesale power supplier has resulted in significant upward pressure in our wholesale power costs. And that has, of course, required us to pass that on to members. Unfortunately, it's out of our control. So what we're facing right now is how do we maintain customer satisfaction in an environment where our wholesale power costs are on the rise. So that is, I would say, the predominant issue that we're facing right now in Western Kentucky.
And what was the percentage rate of that rate increase?
In the neighborhood altogether in the 50 to 60% range.
Okay. Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning.
You mentioned that some of the decisions you make affect you well beyond just a few years, but up to 40 years or so. My question is, how do you predict the industry will change in the next 5 to 10 years? And how would you try and shape that in regard to OPPD?
Wow. So predicting what's going to happen in this industry in the next 5 years is a very good question. And I'm going to hedge my bet and say there's no way we can predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years. And if you look at what's gone on in the last 20, 30 years and how many twists and turns this industry has had, from we're short on gas in the United States to we need nuclear power and that's going to be our predominant role, and clean coal is going to be our future. And I would argue that it's impossible to predict with any credibility what is going to happen in our industry in the future. And the last 20, 30 years is an example of that. A lot of folks have made huge bets on predicting, and there's bets being made today on what's going to happen in the future. And you're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments here. And they're just that, unfortunately. They're bets with very little assurance that there's not going to be new surprises that are going to change drastically the dynamics of the economic analysis that was done to lead you to make a decision. So coming around back to your question, I think the answer is two direct responses. One is diversification. Just like in personal investments, you must have a diversification because we don't know that coal is the right answer or wind is the right answer or nuclear is the right answer. So I think it's prudent for utilities to have a very strong and balanced portfolio of, and I don't want to say generating assets, I'm talking about wholesale power supply. It doesn't have to be necessarily owned by the utility. So I'd say diversification is important from a risk management and risk hedging perspective. You also asked the question about what would I do at OPPD relative to the uncertainty of the future. And I would say it's critical that a CEO in an organization must engage from a legislative and a regulatory perspective to try to influence how this industry is going. It's paramount that any organization, any utility in this industry engage to make sure that policy changes in this country are being made on a practical basis, and we're not setting ourselves up for consumer rate pressure in the future because of policymakers that may not necessarily have all the facts. So I would say I would expect OPPD to be extremely engaged in that process, and I know you are already.
I have a question that follows up on trends and predictions is, what are your beliefs on global warming or climate change? And, what are they based on? And, what actions would you take, with your organization now?
Sure. Well, so the first question is, what are my beliefs on climate change, man-made climate change? And, obviously, there's a lot of science out there that points to the fact that we may be seeing man-made impacts on climate change. That's not, and what I have a little bit of a problem with, that's not solely because of the electric utility industry. There's also a transportation element on this, which represents about 30 to 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are in the world. As an engineer, I would not doubt that there could be a man-made effect to climate, impact on climate, but I think that's not. I think the question is, there's a philosophical question here, and then there's also a practical question here. And that philosophically, I think the question is, can we do anything about it as a nation in light of what other countries are doing? And I think there's also an element of this that needs to be discussed on reversibility of what's going on. So I wouldn't doubt that there is an impact on climate change due to man-made effects or man-made activities. And I think it is important that any utility have a strong aspect of renewables in their portfolio, if nothing else, but for fuel diversification as well as climate change impact. But I also am concerned that we decide that the pendulum is going to swing so far to the renewable side and non-fossil side of things that it will have significant rate pressure to consumers. And I think the science, I have never seen a study that says that if we do all this in the United States, are we affecting global carbon emissions adequately to reverse the trend that we're currently potentially seeing in the environment. So I think that's philosophically, I don't mean to be vague in my answer, but I think those are legitimate questions before there are substantial investments made and commitments made in our future.
And what is the percentage of coal that's used in, I know Kentucky is rated either the number 1 or number 2 state
Correct.
of coal producers, so that's kind of a homegrown advantage. And from a generation standpoint, what's the coal, fossil fuel versus natural gas makeup of the generation portfolio?
In Kentucky?
Yeah.
In Kentucky, it's predominantly coal. So today, I believe it's north of 95% of the power produced in Kentucky is from coal. There are a number of very large natural gas plants that either have been approved by the Kentucky Public Service Commission or are being proposed to the Kentucky Public Service Commission that are planned. So that's a mix that is changing, and what's also changing, of course, is the amount of coal mines, particularly in eastern Kentucky, that are now permanently shut down. Can I just go back to your earlier question, Mr. Barrett? And that is, on a regulatory perspective, you got the climate change, I think, has a philosophical discussion. Do you believe in it? What do we do about it? Is it reversible? But practically speaking, we've got regulation on us. And the EPA in June is due to come out with a regulation that says these are the state requirements, and states will have a year to come back with a state compliance plan. So whether you believe in it or not, I think is somewhat of a moot point here, because we are regulated at the federal level by EPA, and so we're going to have to deal with this whether we believe that there's a problem or not. And I think, again, going back to my earlier comments, is it's prudent for utilities to consider a strong element of diversification in their portfolio to address these kind of risks.
Hey,
Thank you.
Greg, I've got a question then to follow up on Director Hurley's question on what's the world looking like in 5, 10 years? It's tough to, but as public power, you've been in public power, and the state is all public power here in Nebraska, and OPPD, of course, is. But what do you think the benefits of being a public power company are, and maybe even some of the detriments of being a public power? I mean, there's good and there's bad in both, but what's your opinion of
Yeah,
the benefits of public power?
I've got to tell you, I like coming to work every day knowing what I have to do, clearly. There's only one thing I got to do. Excuse me. And that's to make the right decisions for the public, the consumer. It's not to please shareholders. It's not to try to achieve earnings, quarterly earnings objectives. And I'm not saying that, that's a negative thing, but in our business, I think coming to work as a public power agency, it allows our decision-making to be clean and pure. So I would say that is one of the primary benefits that I see in public power. Whether you're a municipal, whether you're a power district, whether you're an electric cooperative, it's all the same. We're here for one reason and one reason only. As far as the disadvantages go, a lot of criticism of our industry has to do with, especially in states where public service commissions aren't providing regulation over public power entities, and there's been, frankly, some slips in our industry where governance has been lax. And there are a couple situations in the cooperative world where cooperatives have gotten themselves into trouble because there wasn't adequate governance over senior leadership teams. I would say that's not the norm. And the norm that with every public power entity that I've ever had is we're trying to do the right thing. We've got a self-regulatory process in place where, frankly, if customers of OPPD don't like what you guys are doing or what any director is doing, they have the power of the vote. And that's a pretty attractive thing in our industry, I think. Some of the criticisms that we're not advanced, perhaps, as some of the investor owns, I take that with a grain of salt as well. I think if what you've seen, what public power has done with smart grid deployment of smart grid technology, I think we're in many cases leading the industry in that. So, I'm a big fan, especially in our industry where we're delivering a vital service to consumers. It's a great model.
To follow up on that, as far as the smart grid, and have you had any experience at Kenergy with any other demand-side management programs? I know that you do have some tax, some rate credits and that type of stuff as far as your geothermal. You have a program for that as far as giving some credits for that. Can you explain what ideas that you think are very, very valid as far as demand-side management and other things like that?
Sure. And not just at Kenergy, but in public power, and I think most electric co-ops and public power entities are very focused on energy efficiency and demand-side management. So there's a difference here. One is, how do you save the public from using kilowatt hours? And then the other aspect of this is, how do you reduce our peak demand so we don't have to build the next power plant or enter into a long-term power contract? And to answer your question, yes, this is something that I think is paramount for an organization. This is the cheapest avoided cost of the business, and it's there, and it benefits our consumers. So in my mind, this is a tremendous priority for any organization, particularly public power organization. And there's a variety of ways of doing this. Right now, we're heavily involved in lighting systems, not just at the residential level, but also at the commercial level. Talking about high-efficiency appliances. You're talking about home weatherizations. You're talking about heat pumps. But then you're also talking about deploying smart grid technology. And in my mind, when you deploy smart grid technology, now you're able to talk to the home. And now you can then open up programs for consumers to elect, not require, but elect to participate in, where now if they choose to participate and get a financial benefit from, we can control certain electric consuming devices in their home, like electric hot water heaters, air conditioners, and other things that we would deploy through IT technology and smart grid technology during those times when we have to shave our peak because we're getting tight. And frankly, in a lot of RTOs, like SPP, if we can prove that we can shave peaks by 5, 10, 20 megawatts, whatever the number is, that we can monetize and sell as emergency demand response into these RTOs. So there's tremendous amount of benefits associated with energy efficiency and demand response programs that apply at the residential level, commercial level, and even at the industrial level. So in my mind, that's a huge priority I believe any utility should have.
Thank you. Okay, finally, as this is the final question, but it's a doozy, by the way.
Okay.
If you would become our president and CEO, what would your plan be for the first 60 to 100 days, 90 to 100 days?
Okay. So, I don't, my approach to coming on and leading organizations is you need at least that, and I would argue more than that, to get a sense of what's going on in the organization. So, to be honest with you, my response directly would be to listen, to learn. So any decisions that would be made even within the first 4 to 5 months, I think would be rash decision making. You got to learn and appreciate the organization and before any significant decisions can come out of this, a chief executive officer. So to take your question and expand it out a bit to 4 or 5 months, I would say it would just frankly be, don't look for any dramatic changes or recommendations, because in my mind, the new CEO, perhaps maybe the internal candidates might be better positioned, but certainly as an external candidate, I would not be in a position, I wouldn't feel, to make any kind of concrete decisions and recommendations during that time. So it would be a period of learning and listening.
Any other questions?
We have these a few follow-up questions we need to ask.
Yep, if you would like to ask that. Who's that? I've got most of them.
Greg, many OPPD employees are represented by unions. In your opinion, what does a good union management relationship look like? And what would you do to make this happen at OPPD?
Sure. And I would say this isn't a very different answer than management and board relationship. I mean, we're after the same objectives here. And so just as I would want to have a open, transparent, trusting relationship with the board, I think it's imperative that management has an open, trusting, and transparent relationship with the leaders of a bargaining unit. I have dealt with organized departments in the past successfully, have negotiated collective bargaining agreements in the past. Kenergy is not organized today in New York. We were organized both inside and outside the office, and certainly I had some exposure at it at GE. So to answer your question directly, we need to be trying to accomplish the same thing here, and the openness and transparency needs to be. Each side needs to know the pressures that the other is feeling to come up with an equitable solution.
Hey, Greg, I've got a question. You've had a little experience in the nuclear world.
Right.
We have a nuclear reactor. Are you familiar? You're probably not as intimate as some of the internals, but how would you use that nuclear experience to help us? We've had some issues with Fort Calhoun Station. How could you be helpful in your background or whatever going forward with that, running a plant?
Sure.
All that it entails, which is a lot, as you know.
Well, I can't give you specifics because I'm not intimately familiar with the operations of Fort Calhoun, but I can tell you that I understand the technology. One of the things that I was able to accomplish earlier in my career was I completed training as a senior reactor control room operator. And these are roles that folks are trained in to be the senior person in a control room. And so as part of that training, I'm sure you can appreciate, it is extensive. It involves not just knowing every detail and of system and subsystem in a nuclear power plant, but it also involves the regulatory requirements that nuclear plants are unique to nuclear plants and that need to be adhered to. So I've got a familiarity with that based on my prior experience in the nuclear world, and I would say I would bring that to the job. Is I know where these guys are coming from, because I lived through it. I did not actually be a control room operator, but I was trained in it, and it was with the utility folks that I participated in it. So I think I got a strong appreciation for the technology, the operational pressures, and the regulatory pressures that have to go along with those type of generation technologies.
You said earlier in your career, things have changed. Have you been aware or stayed up on some of the
Sure.
changes?
Yeah, I've been watching it, and you know, my position is that you know, we were talking earlier. You know, it was exciting to see that we were starting to see an insurgence, and we are seeing an insurgence of nuclear power back in this country. And I think, you know, there seems to be a level of support at the federal level to encourage nuclear as a replacement for the 80,000 megawatts of coal that is projected to be retired in the next few years, primarily due to MATS compliance. It is something I'm watching very carefully. You know, cooperatives are a major owner of the Vogtle 3 and 4 plant, so I am staying involved in that to see how the progress proceeds on that. And you know, frankly, it's exciting to see that we've got 3 new nuclear plants for decades under construction in the United States. On the flip side, or other side of the coin, it's very concerning that these plants come online, on schedule, and on budget to encourage further nuclear development as a very capable substitute of coal replacements. And I think the jury is still out right now on how successful those plants are going to be.
As a follow-up to that, I don't know whether you're aware that we've basically joined the Exelon fleet by contract. They don't own us, we still have the license and all that. And I know it's kind of unfair as an external candidate, but how would you feel, what's your comfort level with working in a situation like that? And what would you do to establish a firm, sound relationship with Exelon?
Well, I've got tremendous respect for Exelon. I mean, they obviously are nuclear leaders in this country. So in my mind, when I heard that, it makes all the sense in the world to me. Exelon has economies of scale, having a fleet of nuclear plants that they're operating and maintaining that OPPD does not. So it seems to me to be a very logical relationship. Obviously, this is an asset OPPD has, and OPPD needs this plant to operate and effectively and well. And so certainly Exelon needs to be held accountable to do that. And I'm sure the relationship that you have in place with them has performance standards associated with that they need to comply for or comply to. And if not, there would be implications or penalties associated with them not operating that plant very well. So it makes all the sense in the world. In my mind, you know, again, going back to my earlier comment, you don't have to own generation to have a very solid wholesale power supply portfolio. You don't have to operate generation to have a strong wholesale power portfolio. And in fact, with the risks associated with owning concrete and bricks and mortar, I think in the future it's only prudent to consider those type of relationships more.
Good, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions of anyone? Then
With that being the final question, we'll now, you know, make a motion and vote to go into a closed session to discuss things of a little more sensitive nature with Greg.
Do we have a second to that?
But before we vote, I'll point out to the folks in the audience, thanks for coming down and attending today. We appreciate you being here and taking an interest. Upon the conclusion of our closed session, we will return here as a kind of a housekeeping and legalese kind of thing, to come back here and just make a motion to come out of executive session, and then we will temporarily adjourn. We will resume our process with our final candidate at 1:30 this afternoon. Okay? And you're certainly welcome to return for that. Okay, at this point, I'd like to make the motion. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 9:45 a.m. for discussion of confidential business information or sensitive personnel issues involving the individual being interviewed. A closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest and to prevent needless injury to the reputation or of persons who have not requested a public hearing. This closed session will be limited to confidential business information or sensitive personnel matters involving the individual being interviewed in connection with the search and selection of the president and CEO of the Omaha Public Power District.
And our second? We heard that. Okay, roll call?
Barrett,
Yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Gay,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Hurley,
Yes.
McGuire,
Yes.
Mines.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Yes.
Motion carried.
To go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to confidential business information or sensitive personnel matters involving the individual being interviewed in connection with the search and selection of the president and CEO of the Omaha Public Power District. No votes or board action will be taken during the closed session. Thank you for attending.
About an hour.